Hello, my name's Roddy and today we're going to look at why Britain first joined the European Union via its forerunner, the European Economic Community, in 1973. The European Economic Community, or EEC, was founded in 1957 with the Treaty of Rome and would bring about the economic integration of France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg with a customs union and common market. Ultimately, the genesis of Britain's decision to join the EEC in 1973 was that which is at the root of all political decision making: a passion for the betterment of humanity. I'm just kidding. Money. Prior to attaining EEC membership, the UK's economy was the sick man of Europe. This at a time when Europe was enjoying a golden age of growth and achieving post-war economic recovery at an astonishingly successful rate. The pound was weak after being devalued in 1967, Britain had suffered a wave of strikes in the late 1960s, GDP per capita in the UK relative to that of the EEC had declined by around 25% between the establishment of the EEC in 1957 and Britain's entry in 1973. And if you're the sort of person that's outraged by the exponential rising cost of Alfredo over the last decade, just consider that inflation across all goods in Britain was hitting 10% at this time. By the mid-20th century, UK trade with Europe was relatively limited. It only encompassed around 1/4 of UK exports, whereas the Commonwealth made up around 1/3. However, trade with the Commonwealth would decline steadily throughout the latter half of the 20th century, so much so that the Republic of Ireland alone would rival the entire Commonwealth as a UK trading partner by the beginning of the 21st century. This was partly because the Commonwealth was a less sophisticated trading bloc in comparison to the likes of the EEC. The former colonies were developing their own less Anglo-centric trade policies now they had gained independence from the Empire, and the Commonwealth was comprised of many underdeveloped, under-industrialised nations. So by the 1970s, this was really beginning to have an effect on UK trade, and it's important to remember that trade tariffs were globally much higher at this time than they would be in the 21st century, and therefore the prospect of entering an increasingly vibrant, tariff-free European market right on Britain's doorstep became ever more attractive. Another burden on the British economy was heavy industry, which was growing stagnant during the period, and increasingly it was subsidised by the state. Whereas at the same time, French and West German heavy industry was thriving because they were enjoying the advantages of a coal and steel free trade agreement. Naturally, Britain wanted in on the success and hoped that access to European markets and European free trade would revitalise British industry. Britain did help found the European Free Trade Association in 1960. But because the organisation didn't have the full advantages of EEC membership, and Britain traded so little with EFTA members such as Norway, Austria and Switzerland, it wasn't enough to mitigate decline in trade with the Commonwealth. So when Prime Minister Edward Heath brought Britain into the EEC in 1973, he said, "This will enable us to be more efficient and more competitive in gaining more markets not only in Europe but the rest of the world." And sure enough, the UK's falling GDP per capita relative to that of the EEC would quickly stabilise, and in 10 years, the UK's trade with the EEC would have increased at an average annual rate of 24%, 59% of US investment into the EEC was going to Britain, and trade with the lucrative Far Eastern markets had also risen dramatically. Although I said the economy was the key factor which drove Britain to join Europe, the economy wasn't necessarily the sole factor. The United States of America were very keen to see Britain at the heart of Europe and applied pressure on the UK via threats to withhold much needed US economic investment and perhaps even withhold US nuclear Polaris missiles from Britain. This was partly because the US wanted a strong, stable, wealthy Western Europe to counteract the communist East during the Cold War. However, because the Anglo-American special relationship was so strong at this time, the US also saw an opportunity to strengthen Washington's voice in Europe via London's. In fact, the possibility of the UK acting as an American Trojan horse was one of the key factors which caused French President Charles de Gaulle to veto British membership of the EEC in 1963 and again in 1967. Part of the reason why Britain never joined the original European Coal and Steel Community when it was founded in 1952 was that Britain saw its horizons as being beyond those of Europe, and this was partly based on a feeling of superiority at being the only European nation involved in the Second World War not to have been invaded or subjugated. But in fairness, post-war Britain was a permanent member of the UN Security Council, it still had a vast territorial empire, over half of all global trade was conducted using the pound sterling, and Britain was still the richest nation in Europe and had the highest GDP per capita of any major European nation. Britain still considered itself a player on the global rather than European stage, echoed in the words of Winston Churchill, who said in 1953, "We are with Europe but not of it. We are linked but not combined. We are interested and associated but not absorbed." But Britain would decline rapidly as a world power in the coming decades. The Suez Crisis of 1956 saw Britain well and truly put in its place by the USA and Soviet Union. Britain would now have to accept its new status as, at best, number 2 in this shiny new American world. By 1970, the British Empire had utterly collapsed, sterling was in decline, and the people of Britain themselves had long since become poorer than their continental counterparts in the EEC. And just when you thought life for people in Britain couldn't get any worse, the Beatles split up in April that year. It was a hard blow to British pride, but it was all too clear that Europe was increasingly the nation's only path forward from perpetual demise. As cabinet notes on the EEC from the time of Prime Minister Harold Macmillan reflect, if we remained outside of it, our political influence in Europe and the rest of the world is likely to decline. The final factor worth mentioning, albeit it does still pale in comparison to economics, was that Britain desired a stable Europe. Naturally, Britain and its allies wanted a strong, unified Western Europe that acted as an antidote to the existential threat posed by the Soviet Union, but Britain had also become increasingly aware of something miraculous occurring in Europe. After the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and the German Empire's annexation of Alsace and Lorraine, a bitter rivalry had existed between France and Germany, a rivalry which would help provoke the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, which itself then intensified Franco-German animosity with France's annexation of the German Rhineland and imposing of the brutal Treaty of Versailles, which itself was then a key factor which led to the outbreak of the most brutal war in human history, the Second World War, in 1939. But instead of the Second World War leading to further ill-feeling between the two nations, France and West Germany would grow closer, and would even sign a sincere, heartfelt, highly symbolic treaty of friendship in 1963. France and West Germany's economic interdependence through the EEC and European coal and steel community had created genuine cooperation and solidarity between the two nations, making war not only unthinkable but materially impossible. Britain saw the EEC as a credible force for peace in Europe, and Britain would ensure that it was there alongside its allies to guarantee that peace and stability in the continent was maintained. So there we have it. Britain's decision to join Europe was driven by economic and political pragmatism, and it was through that prism of pragmatism that Britain would continue to view its relationship with Europe, rather than any romantic notions of continental unity, often causing Britain to be seen as an awkward, hesitant member of the European project. Well, thanks a lot for watching, hopefully this was useful, and I'll see you again next time.